Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Conference of Consulting Actuaries Leadership Development Community Podcast. My name is Michael Clark. I'm host of the podcast. I'm a past president of the CCA and currently a managing director at Agilis based in Denver, Colorado. I'm joined by two guests today. This is one of the rare occasions that we have to have multiple guests on our podcast. Craig Chu and Jonah Embse. God, Jonah, I told you I was going to butcher it, and I butchered the wrong part.
All
But
good.
let me give a little bit of background and introduction on these two guys, and then we'll get our discussion going. So, Craig, I'm going to start with you. Craig is the Retirement System Deputy Chief Actuary with the New York State Office of the Comptroller. His experience ranges from corporate audits to executive variable annuity designs, software development, public sector valuation plan design, and compliance testing. A couple of other interesting things about Craig. He previously served as the president and currently sings bass in the New York City Master Chorale, which is cool. Did not know that about you, Craig, and is something that the next CCA annual meeting you come to, there's a group of us that had started to make a tradition of going and singing karaoke. So you're going to have to come with us on that next time. In addition to that, from May 2016 to May 2017, Craig and his husband took what they called an adult gap year, putting their careers on hold and traveling the world. They visited almost 50 countries in the year, and Craig currently serves as the SAGAA board secretary. Interesting stuff there, Craig. What was your favorite place that you visited on your adult gap year?
Everything is so different. It's always hard to name one favorite. I honestly, I gotta say probably Easter Island, Rapa Nui out in the Pacific, which is known mostly for the giant stone heads. Just really, really incredible, and it's so remote that everything is pretty preserved in terms of indigenous culture and all of the things that you're able to see there. It was just kind of mind blowing.
No, that's awesome. That's definitely a bucket list place to go. I mean, you see pictures, but I'm sure it's way different when you actually experience it in person.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then in addition to Craig, we've got Jonah Embse. Jonah is the corporate vice president and actuary at New York Life, where he focuses on regulatory and financial oversight, asset liability management, and principle-based reserving. A couple of other things about Jonah. Jonah is also a singer. He also sings bass with the New York City. He sings bass with the New York City Gay Men's Chorus, which has been around since 1980 and has over 300 LGBTQ plus singers. Also an avid traveler. That's a common theme between the two of you, although Jonah has a few more countries under his belt, having visited more than 70 countries and plans to visit more. Jonah is currently the chair of the SAGAA Regulatory and Advocacy Committee, which we're going to talk more about in our discussion today. All right, Jonah, I'm going to ask you the same question. Like, of all the places you've been, what stands out? What's some of your favorites?
Yeah, I feel almost a little bad. I was like, when I saw Craig's comments for tidbits, I was like, wow, mine are eerily the same right there. Again, I have a feeling that I have a similar comment with him where it's like it's so hard because every place is so different. I think that one of the coolest that I personally enjoyed might have been Egypt, just because the little kid in me always loved thinking about like the ancient Egyptian Empire, and just seeing all of those historical sites and all of the relics of the old world. I thought was just an amazing experience.
All right, so let me ask you both this. How many continents have you visited then?
I will say at least I have been to all of them outside of Antarctica, and I guess if you include Australia, but otherwise all the other ones, yes.
Yeah,
All right. And any plans to go to Antarctica?
Someday, I will say, maybe. I got a lot of other places to see first.
yeah. Maybe we sort of have a rule that if our only reason or our biggest reason to go someplace is just to check it off the list, then we probably shouldn't be going there.
All right. All right. Interesting. All right, guys. Well, we're talking about traveling. Let's maybe pivot that to talking about how you've traveled through your careers so far. I'd like for people to get to know you both a bit better, and I would love for you to each take a few minutes and talk about how your careers evolved. Like, why did you decide to become an actuary? What's currently the best part of your job? Those type of things. Craig, let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. So my undergraduate was at Caltech out in Pasadena, California. It was, you know, it was a really, really rigorous place for the math and science crowd. And you know, as I looked around me, undergrad there is much like I hear about people who are musicians and then go to Juilliard, and many of them sort of once they reach that levels are wondering, you know, is this really something that I want to go into? And that was sort of the moment when I pivoted, I think, from being interested in academia to being interested in something a little more concrete. And I did know about the actuarial profession sort of before I actually started attending college, but I think a few years into my math major, I realized I really wanted a chance to actually do something that would have some concrete impacts. Whereas, you know, abstract mathematics, not to say that it doesn't have applications, but sometimes it gets so heady that it's really hard to actually feel the real world impacts of your work. And so I pivoted my junior and senior years into looking for an actuarial career.
Interesting. So, okay, so you started looking at actuarial career. Where did you start? What were you doing?
Well, you know, I knew I was a pretty social person. I was a little more extroverted than a lot of the folks around me. And, you know, I think a lot of us when we're in college and we're considering actuarial careers don't really understand all of the intricacies about all of our subspecialties and, you know, sometimes how specialized it can be. But I did know that I wanted to go into consulting. I wanted to work with people. I wanted to have a chance to talk to people and build relationships. And the next thing I knew, I sort of found myself completely across the country. My first job out of college was actually at PwC in Boston.
And then, so you've more or less stayed in consulting. I know you mentioned and I think I saw in your background too, you had a little bit in software development, but with everything that you were expecting out of a career in consulting, has that more or less played out for you?
Yeah, it has, and that is diversion the right term? That sort of side trip. I spent, I think, 6 years at Wintech, who most pension actuaries will know are the makers of Proval. And I enjoyed that as well. And that was certainly right before our what we called our adult gap year. The I would say the progression through consulting has mostly played out. It's been interesting to sort of because as you know, when you start out of school, your initial couple of years, you spend a lot of time learning just how technical the job can be. Like the really in-depth knowledge takes a lot of work to get under your belt. But as I've had a chance to grow and build those relationships, I would say that's true. It is true. You know, my career has been varied enough that I've sort of bounced in and out of traditional consulting roles, now being an in-house pension actuary, but it has mostly held up. Yeah.
So what is the best part about your job currently? When you look at, you know, coming to work each day, what is it that gets you excited about coming into the office?
It really is genuinely the concrete impact I was looking for when I first started looking for an actuarial career. Being in the public sector, you know, I work with folks in the pension plan. I see headlines. We all see headlines about people in the pension plan, in their pension benefits. Those of us in the retirement industry know that it's starting to become a dicey proposition for a lot of folks to retire if they don't have traditional DB pensions, because a lot of people don't really understand exactly how to build up the nest egg that they're going to need. And it really does give me the nice feeling that I'm actually contributing back in a way that is really in depth, in a way where I feel like I'm really contributing something that is so specialized that I really get the chance to do it well.
That's awesome. So you're getting that opportunity that you were looking for coming out of college to have that mathematical background, but have that people facing and kind of consultative, communicative element to the job as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Jonah, how about you? Talk to us for a few minutes about how your career has evolved. Why did you decide to become an actuary? How did you go from that to where you're at today?
Yeah, of course. So I will say I kind of stumbled upon it, which I do think is a common refrain you hear from a lot of people. I was an undergraduate at Ohio State University, and interestingly enough, at the time, I always was a very big fan of statistics, and I also am a very big like sports nerd, I like to say. And I was like, oh, maybe I could do something along the lines of there. It was the era of like thinking of like, oh, Moneyball and stuff like that. I was like, maybe I could make a career type of thing out of that. So I was planning on to go into statistics, but actually, despite offering like some master's programs, Ohio State only offered an one undergraduate degree in their Department of Statistics, and it was actuarial science. So I kind of firmly just stumbled across it, and when I kind of went through the whole process of just kind of like reviewing what the major was, I found that it was this really great blend of economics, of business, of statistics, of business acumen, and just that combination of everything was something that just really interested me. And I felt that it was, after discussing with a handful of the professors there, I just really felt that it was a great career path for me to go down. And I will say, like, originally, like, interned, worked with Nationwide Insurance. They're based out of Columbus as well, where I was going to school. And then I hopped over to New York Life after I graduated, and I've been with New York Life ever since for about 6 years now. And I think that some of the things that I just really enjoy is how everything changes and evolves over time. I think that, like, that's why principles-based preserving in particular has been a big topic, I would say, throughout my entire career, is just seeing how that evolves and changes. Was a completely new regime for reserving, and then it still changes every single year with little tweaks and updates, and they're rolling out with new chapters, of course, to covering new products and everything along those lines. And being involved through my company, through the Academy of Actuaries on different groups as well, has just been a really great experience, and I like seeing and thinking about where things will grow and change over time.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that. I'm sure people will find a lot of value in just understanding kind of your career evolutions here. I want to talk a bit, since we're talking about the Sexuality and Gender Alliance for Actuaries, an organization that both of you volunteer with and have roles with. Let's talk for a bit about the challenges that LGBTQ actuaries face. Where should we start with that, Craig?
You know, it's such a broad question. You know, maybe we can talk about it in terms of the same narrative along the stages of an actuary's career. And you know, my professional life has been in the Northeast. I was first in Boston and then in New York City. And so these experiences can be really different in a lot of places. So, you know, that's sort of the large caveat, but it's very interesting because as the world, I think, has progressed, you know, through survey results, through a lot of public information, a lot more young people are identifying along the LGBTQ spectrum, which I think most people don't take as, you know, a sign of gay people suddenly appeared everywhere, but more the sign of, you know, through visibility, people are starting to realize there's a lot of aspects to their identity that, you know, maybe just weren't appreciated or weren't understood 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so at the junior levels of one's career coming out of college, and I think we have all had long enough careers to experience this, you know, a lot of times the first few years of someone's career coming out of college, a big part of the learning curve is just learning how to interact professionally, learning when you're in those junior roles that you should feel comfortable bringing your whole self to work, but finding the blend of professionalism where, you know, you're not talking about, you know, too much of the stuff that's not relevant to work, but you're making sure that the people you work with are supportive and that you're in a supportive space so that you can actually get your work done. In the mid and later careers, it's interesting because I think, you know, depending on the environment, LGBTQ plus actuaries have a little bit more of a role in creating that affirming environment and creating those workspaces where you feel like you can get your best work out of the junior staff who feel comfortable to bring themselves to work, to sort of serve as an example that, you know, everyone should be comfortable with all of the facets of their identity. It's certainly different. I don't know if that helps, Michael.
Yeah, no, it does. Jonah, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, of course. So I think that the biggest thing for me is that it really is like how much it changes over time. I think that it's interesting where I find that among younger actuaries, you definitely see a lot more representation, but not necessarily that type of representation at higher levels in different companies. And I think that it's the nature of just the generational differences. And some things like that, I think, do take a lot of time. In all reality, I find it, on one hand, almost amazing of how much perception has changed for like a lot of the gay rights movements over the last several decades. But at the same time, some certain things I think just take generational change, and you can't necessarily speed everything up. So I think that it is interesting, but I find the general path forward promising.
Do you feel like, you know, in looking over the last like 10 to 15 years, specifically here in the US, do you feel like this is just becoming more and more commonplace, that it's not as much of an issue as it was even 20, 30 years ago?
I think that is tricky to answer because it's, on one hand, you can say that it's maybe easier, but I find that it may be easier only for certain types of people. And it's not necessarily a lot of the benefit and gain that has happened a lot with the gay rights movement may not necessarily be evenly distributed among all the different members, I would say, of the community in a lot of ways. And I think that there is a lot of work also still to be done in that regard. And I think that it just kind of varies.
How so? Like, where do you see those discrepancies where some elements of what is generally lumped into LGBTQ maybe have it different than others?
So I think that it's just that the size of the community is it is an umbrella in a lot of ways, where it's a lot of different types of people. And just as Craig and I are both just like gay men, there's a lot of other members of that community as well. I think of non-binary, intersex, transgender individuals, and then you throw in other elements of intersectionality, where just being a member of the LGBTQ plus movement is not necessarily your only identity. I think that a lot of people from, say, different backgrounds as well, when you start having those different things cross and clash, that it's not necessarily the gains are not just, again, like always, I think, the same for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end of the day, I'm a gay man, but also like a white male. So it's a bit different. I think my experience is different than a lot of other people's experience.
No, I think that's insightful. That's helpful for people to, I think, understand, right? Where, again, because it is that umbrella kind of catch-all there for a lot of different things, that it doesn't mean that even within that umbrella that things are the same. They can be very different in terms of people's experiences. And Craig, I'd love to get your thoughts too.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that, I think Jonah's completely right. And it's easy for us being in New York City and Denver, and at these professional conferences to sometimes feel like we're in a little bit of a bubble, or to be in a bubble and not realize it. There's a lot of geographic diversity of opinion here, where, you know, as is true in a lot of places in the world and a lot of topics, urban areas and more rural areas have a lot of ideological divide along some of these issues. And that, yeah, I think the gains not being evenly distributed is a way we can express it that actuaries will understand. This is not a uniform distribution of gains. You know, another prominent example is as the sexuality diverse, or the gender diversity aspect of the umbrella has developed. There's a lot of parallels to sort of the treatment and knowledge of the trans community now versus the treatment and understanding of the gay and lesbian community 20 years ago. You know, there's one prominent author has espoused a lot of virulently anti-trans views that, because I know and acknowledge I'm a little bit in the bubble, a lot of my friends are up in arms about. But I realize, you know, this author, if this author had said the same thing about gay people right now, there'd be such a ridiculous outcry. And yet right now I don't want to say it's crickets, but people seem, you know, able to partition those things in a way that's just not symmetric. It's just, yeah, Jonah, that was pretty perfect. It's just not a uniform distribution here.
Yeah, no, I think that's very insightful. And I think, again, from a leadership perspective, right, for people trying to understand like how to help people within the LGBTQ plus community within the actuarial profession, is that it's not a one size fits all. You're going to find different facets within different segments of the entire population there. It's not, I like how you said that. It's not a uniform distribution. There's definitely some differences there. Craig, what have been some of your own personal experiences that you can share with our listeners to help them gain a better appreciation for some of the challenges that LGBTQ plus actuaries deal with?
So I'm happy to say I'm older than I look. I started in the workforce, 20 years ago. And 2004 was the 21st century, but in some ways it was still a different world from the world we're living in today. So I started in the workforce in 2004, and I did spend, I think, 6 to 9 months sussing out my coworkers, making, code switching a bit in terms of how I talked about my weekend, how I talked about life before I decided that I needed to sort of bite the bullet and actually bring my whole self to work, because I was going to be an adult in the 21st century. And everybody I worked with couldn't have been more supportive. It was pretty great, and as you know, Michael, in a lot of these consulting firms, particularly in pension consulting, you sort of get the staff level stratification as you have this crew of junior folks just out of school, who I knew felt, very similarly to how I did. And then, junior management, senior partners were a different story to sort of understand a bit. But because of the time that it was, and this was at PwC in 2004, they were starting to look at affinity groups and ways to sponsor and support LGBT employees. I was actually picked and had some great opportunities meeting some gay folks from around the firm as we went to a conference called Out and Equal, which I think was in its formative years then. I confess I don't know their full history. And it was, I felt very supported there in a way that was really great. And it was a really great opportunity being at a large firm that they had the resources to sponsor something like that. One of the best jokes I ever made in the entire time I was at PwC is that the annual ethics training that everybody has to take was always titled Navigating the Gray, because it's an audit firm. There's an annual ethics training as people have to sort of refresh themselves on all the rules. And once a year, I got to tell my coworkers that I was close to. I was like, "Oh, sorry, guys, I'm not around next week. The firm is sending me to Navigating the Gay," which was just a delight to the point to the point that these are the jokes, folks. That's what I remember.
Craig, let me ask you something about. I want to go back to something you said here. How did your trying to think of the right word here. What was it like coming to work before you brought your whole self compared to when you did bring your whole self to work? What changed in terms of your mentality with what you did on a day-to-day basis when you made that change?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Michael. That's I think one of the most important points when we're talking about having supportive workspace too, because when you have closeted people at work or people who don't feel like they can bring their whole selves, some part of their energy is spent figuring out how they're going to describe, at the age of 22, a lot of people are dating. Hey, I had a date over the weekend. It was like, oh, how was she? What was she like? Those sorts of things. You don't want your employees to spend their time figuring out how to coach themselves, how to manage themselves, and exactly where to draw the line on those things, because you want your employees to be able to spend all of their energy doing the best job they can, right? You get better professionally, you get better fulfilled employees, but you also get better work. And I found that I was able to stop thinking about, can I say this in front of my coworkers, and actually, dig into the work more. And I don't want to bore anybody listening about, oh, I was able to dig into all of the ERISA rules and understand these spreadsheets better. But it really was the fact that I didn't have to feel distracted, wondering, how I was going to talk about my personal life.
No, I like that. And I mean, and that has so many applications to even beyond LGBTQ issues. But I think specifically here, creating an environment where people can bring themselves to work unashamed and just be who they are, does allow them to focus their mental energy on what an employer would most want them to focus their mental energy on, which is doing their work, doing high quality work, and helping grow the company or increase revenue, whatever it is that someone's involved with. So I appreciate that insight there.
Yeah.
Jonah, want to bring you into this as well. Like, what are some of your personal experiences that you've had in dealing with the challenges of LGBTQ actuaries in the workplace that you think would be beneficial for our listeners to understand?
Of course. So I do think that a lot of it comes down to almost understanding in some ways, and just being a little bit more open-minded to what sometimes the words that you're saying. I think that what Craig mentioned of just like saying like that, of saying like, oh, if you went on a date, how was like the girl or whatever, something like that, like something that is very commonly said, and things like that do tend to stick with like me or something like that. I know that no one ever says that with any sort of bad intention. I know that that is never the, I shouldn't say never, but almost never the case that people say that with bad intention. But things like that do still stick with me always, where it's just like, that's just always like that general assumption, which, I mean, we're actuaries, we're going to say like, yeah, from a probability standpoint, it was the right thing to say. But I think that with language, it's taking a couple moments to be cognizant of what you're saying and how people receive it can be a really big thing. And I think that it is very common, again, with I think a lot of younger generations to be a bit more cognizant of that as well. But sometimes it takes a while for everything else to kind of filter through to older generations. I don't necessarily say this with people having bad intentions, but some things require a lot of change. And I think the language itself changes really fast on all of us sometimes. I think that things that some generations say one way, some generations say another way. I think a great example is, in my opinion, the word queer, where I say that with like almost like, I shouldn't say pride in a sense, where it's like I'm proud to say something like that. But maybe less than a decade ago, people were kind of using that almost as like a slur towards the LGBTQ plus community. So like how language evolves and changes is also really critical in that regard.
Oh, I liked what you said, especially about the assumptions, right? As actuaries, that's what we do. We that's a big part of the job, is making assumptions. But in these day-to-day interactions with colleagues and coworkers and even clients, potentially, it is important, I think, to take a step back and be aware enough to not make those assumptions. Right. So when you're talking with somebody and they refer to their spouse, not making an assumption that that you're talking to a heterosexual person, but saying, oh, tell me more, about your spouse, and getting somebody to open up to actually be able to share, so that you don't make those assumptions incorrectly. Because I think it's interesting what you said, Jonah, is that, and I agree with you, that most people are not throwing out words maliciously, right? They're, like you said, it's a high probability. If I say, oh, how was your date? How was that? What was the girl like? There's a high probability that that's what it is. But there's also a probability that it's not. And so saying, oh, well, tell me about your date. How was it? Like, what did you do? Not focusing so much, or just being cognizant, I think, of the fact that there are different people out there with different experiences, and you can't just assume one way or another. And I like that you said that even though it's not, there's no malintention there, but it's still stuck with you, right? When people would say those things. And again, it goes back to what Craig was saying. It's all of a sudden now you're eating up mental energy, hanging on to some of this stuff instead of being able to apply it towards work.
Yeah, of course.
No, I think that's excellent. Thanks. I appreciate both of you sharing those experiences with us.